Not too long ago at a Walmart or Walmart.com not too far away, there was a R2-D2 with sensor scope released as part of the vintage collection. And, it was an upgrade as far as deco. But if you're like me, and I know I am, you found the fact that this was not the sensor scope advertised on package or even at all. The sensor scope, well, the array here on Hoth is different from the periscope seen here. Probably recognize this most from the scenes on Dagobah, where R2 is tootling along in the swamp. He uses it other times throughout the classic trilogy, and I think even in the prequels. But we're talking about two different things. The sensor scope being that, top high one, and then the array being that second one on the right. Two completely different things. And the package photo and the call out calls it out as a sensor scope. So I was frustrated about this. Other fans might have been as well. And I want to explain because it has to do with the profit and loss statement that controls the budget for what can go into a toy. You see, when toys are created as an assortment, they're put into slots, and all of these slots have to be in balance in order to create the overall profit margin that's required by the company. So if you look at this B sheet for Justice League, you can see it's coded with figures that are repaints, new tools, package only, etc., or full tools, slight new tools. And the repaint figures essentially help pay for the fully tooled figures because they don't have any tooling against them. And then once this entire assortment is created, it is locked so that you know that there's a balance between the figures that need a lot of tooling and the figures that don't need tooling at all. The ones that don't need the tooling essentially help pay for the tooled figures because they have a much larger profit margin than the ones with tooling. It balances each other out to hit the margin required. All right, so back to our good old sensor scope guy. So fans ask, well, yes, so why couldn't that R2 just get a new piece? Well, the reason is he was slotted as a repaint figure. He's a repaint of this previously released R2, albeit with fewer accessories. So just adding an extra accessory, swapping out the already tooled periscope and putting in the sensor array or sensor scope, whatever you want to call it, well, the figure was not available for tooling. He was a repaint figure that was offsetting the cost of the figures that did have tooling. All right, let me show you another example. So let's say you're a clever brand manager. Well, I'll give you an example from something that I worked on, but not at all. I'm definitely not the cleverest brand manager. There's way cleverer brand managers out there, but I only kind of know the examples of things I worked on. So at Mattel, in the DC Universe Classics line, we had a subscription where you could buy all the figures for the year, and if we hit certain tiers, you would get a Doomsday. Tier 1 was Doomsday in the containment suit, less tooling. Tier 2 was the Unleashed Doomsday, way more tooling. Basically because if we produced more overall figures, it would drive up the profit, and therefore more tooling would be available because it wouldn't the higher run would balance out the P&L. Well, in the end, we only hit the first tier, and we could only do the containment suit version. But it didn't leave out the fact that people still wanted the Unleashed one, myself included. So there is the idea of finding another way. So while we weren't able to do this through the subscription, a year or two later, we were able to revisit the Unleashed Doomsday and find a way to get this fully tooled or very highly tooled figure into the line. So let me explain this. We released him not as part of the sub, but just as a one-off item, and even added a torn Superman cape as part of Warner Brothers' requirement to make him even more special. And even though there was a lot of tooling, he was available to be tooled because we also did a series of Superpowers figures with no tooling, meaning they were all repaints. So, well, okay, there was tooling against Mr. Mxyzptlk, but he was a kind of almost a slug figure, didn't need that much tooling. The other tools helped pay for that too. So, in other words, it helped balance out the P&L. Having repaint-only slots, like R2 was in that vintage collection, and just like these Superpowers figures are repaints, well, they essentially opened up the possibility of then bringing in another item that was highly tooled because the low tooled or no tool figures, the repaints, balanced out the fully tooled Doomsday. That's how a P&L works. So you need to maintain the margin target that the company has required you to hit, and you do that with a combination of fully tooled and repaint figures. Lots of repaint figures will get you one fully tooled figure. So back to this R2-D2 example, he was a repaint-only slot, so you couldn't just give him another accessory, much as this Imperial Gunner was a repaint-only. He got extra deco of the Imperial signal on his arms, or signa. These non-tooled repaint figures helped pay for the figures in the wave that did have tooling, like the Bespin Guards that got new heads. Although I think the body might have had some tooling. I think it was a bit of a kit bash from existing parts. But also the Stormtrooper, who got a new belt. So it's kind of like pick your poison. Do you give the Stormtrooper a new belt, or do you give R2-D2 the correct sensor? And the answer was the Stormtrooper belt, and I think they made the right decision, because as much as I'd love to have an R2 that actually had the sensor array, the Stormtrooper belt is, well, just a lot cooler. So that's how basically non-tooled figures, repaints, are worked into the line in abundance, because a lot of them will help pay for one highly tooled figure. That's why you don't get that many fully tooled figures in a year. Lots of fans, it's all about that whole good, fast, and cheap mantra, and that impossibility of having all three at once. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you have to remember that all of this goes back to the people who actually put up the money to fund toys in the first place, which are the original investors, the stockholders. And they have to be paid dividends, or they're not going to invest in the company. So that's kind of the answer to everything. You're wondering why something costs what it does, or why a figure didn't get more tooling? Margin targets based on paying stockholders dividends. I hope this helped clarify tooled and non-tooled slots and how they balance each other out. If you have other questions like this, please let me know in the comments below. I love suggestions for topics and engaging in conversation. Thanks for sharing. It's the best way to support this channel, and I'll see you guys next time.